Saudi Story Channel welcomes you to start the story world's greatest empires, the Islamic Caliphate. Though little remembered in the West today, the Abbasids reigned for 5 centuries. They oversaw an era of Islamic military dominance, city building, brilliant. It has come to be remembered as Islam's golden age. This is the story of the Abbasid Caliphate, history 632 AD. In the Arabian city of Medina, the Prophet Muhammad lies dead. His followers, professing the new religion of Islam, sweep across the Arabian Peninsula, uniting it under the rule of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, God's deputy on earth. Then they burst upon the world stage, taking on the 2 superpowers of the Middle East, the Eastern Roman and Sassanid empires. Both are vulnerable after decades of war, and the Muslims wage a stunning campaign, winning victory after victory. By 651, they have overrun 2/3 of the Eastern Roman Empire and almost all of the Sassanid Empire. But in 656, the 3rd caliph, Uthman, is assassinated, sparking the first Muslim civil war, or fitna. Ali, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, has the support of the people, but he's opposed by the governor of Syria, Uthman's kinsman, Muawiyah. 5 years of bloodshed culminate in Ali's assassination at Kufa. Muawiyah emerges triumphant and establishes a new Umayyad Caliphate. Further conquests help to forge one of the largest empires in history, but it is riven by more civil war. One challenge comes from Husayn, son of Ali, grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. He opposes the succession of Muawiyah's son, Yazid, but in 680 he and his followers are defeated and killed at the Battle of Karbala. Supporters of Ali and his descendants will later become the Shiites. They still commemorate Husayn's death each year on the day of Ashura. The vast Umayyad Caliphate continues to expand, but it contains serious internal divisions. Much of what we know about the Umayyad Caliphate comes from later sources, often hostile. But it seems clear that the small Arab Muslim elite that dominated this great empire was increasingly unpopular with many of its subjects, including some of those later termed dhimmi. These were non-Muslims, including Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, who were treated as an underclass and made to pay extra tax. Even those who did convert to Islam, known as Mawali, were often treated as second-class subjects. Decades of discontent were about to boil over. The symbol of Umayyad authority was their white banner, but in 747, a new symbol rises to challenge their rule, the black banners of the Abbasids. The black banner. The Abbasids are an Arab family, descended from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle Al-Abbas, from whom they take their name. They and their supporters believe this blood tie to the Prophet gives them legitimate claim to the title of Caliph. Far more so than the Umayyads, whom the Abbasids later portray as decadent and despised. The Abbasids promise a return to true Islam, to correct teachings and moral leadership, and send missionaries and agents out across the Caliphate to spread their message. In 747, with the Caliphate once more racked by revolt and civil war, the Abbasids will seize their chance. In eastern Khorasan, a general named Abu Muslim, probably a Persian convert, launches a revolt and takes the black banner of the Hashemites as his symbol. The Hashemites, descendants of Hashim, are the extended family of the Prophet, with the Abbasids prominent amongst them. This frontier region, today comprising northeastern Iran and parts of Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, is particularly ripe for rebellion. Here, Arabs and non-Arab converts live side by side. They intermarry and fight alongside each other to defend the frontier. For many, the Umayyads are distant and unpopular overlords. What's more, opposition has been stoked for decades by Hashemite agents and missionaries who seek to topple the Umayyads and replace them with one of their own. They have sowed the seeds of revolution. So when Abu Muslim begins his revolt, he quickly attracts followers, Arabs, Persians, and Central Asians, many of whom are experienced warriors. And he proves a brilliant commander, winning a series of victories over Umayyad forces and occupying Kufa, capital of Iraq, in 749. The Abbasids now assume leadership of this revolution, and the following year, their forces meet the army of the Umayyad Caliph, Marwan II, at the Zab River. Most of what we know about the battle that follows comes from Abbasid sources. Caliph Marwan appears to have been a brave but reckless commander, launching a head-on cavalry charge against the Abbasid line. Abbasid historians tell how their own troops, inspired by recent victories, stand fast. Their spear walls repel the cavalry. The attack ends in disaster. Umayyad morale is broken, their army routed. Marwan himself flees the battle, but is pursued and killed in Egypt. Other Umayyads are likewise hunted down and exterminated. Even graves are desecrated. One surviving member of the dynasty, Abd al-Rahman, flees to Spain. Just a few years later, he establishes the Emirate of Cordoba, a second Umayyad dynasty that would flourish in Iberia for centuries. Meanwhile, Abu al-Abbas al-Safa becomes the first Abbasid caliph, though it will take the Abbasids more than a decade to consolidate their hold on power. Al-Safa moves the caliph's residence from Haran to Kufa, closer to the Abbasid power base in Persia. In 751, he sends an army to curb the westward expansion of the Chinese Tang dynasty. The campaign culminates in a bloody victory at the Battle of Talas, but also marks the limit of the caliphate's eastward expansion. Many who'd helped overthrow the Umayyads had sought the end of hereditary rule and a return to caliphs elected from within an elite group. They are to be disappointed. In 754, al-Safa is succeeded by his brother al-Mansur. The Abbasids will be the new ruling dynasty, and al-Mansur will prove one of its greatest caliphs. But his reign begins inauspiciously, with the execution of the brilliant and popular general Abu Muslim, now regarded as a potentially dangerous rival. Al-Mansur faces rebellion by the Alids, a powerful clan descended from the Prophet's son-in-law Ali. They resent the growing dynastic power of the Abbasids and press their own claim to rule. Al-Mansur crushes the last major Alid revolt in 762, ushering in an era of stability, prosperity, and peace. That year, he orders the construction of a new capital on the banks of the Tigris River. Officially, it is to be known as Madinat as-Salam, the City of Peace. It will prove his greatest legacy, a city that will become one of the glories of the medieval world. Baghdad. Baghdad, in the reign of al-Mansur's grandson Harun al-Rashid, the caliphate flourishes as never before, with Baghdad at its heart. There are many legends told about Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the rightly guided. He is, after all, a central figure in 1001 Nights, the masterpiece of Arabic literature. The image of al-Rashid that reaches us from such sources is of a devout, wise, and beneficent ruler who prayed 100 times a day and each morning gave 1,000 dirhams to good causes. In legend, al-Rashid wandered the streets of Baghdad disguised as a beggar to see how his subjects lived. He was a brilliant horseman and patron of the arts, and a keen chess player. His court was a place where religion and philosophy could be argued and debated openly, even, on occasion, by a woman. In the caliphate, as in the rest of the medieval world, few women held high status in their own right. But as mothers, wives and concubines, they could exert huge influence. Al-Khayzuran, once a Yemeni slave girl, rose from concubine to caliph's wife and wielded significant power during the reign of her husband, Caliph al-Mahdi, and son Caliph al-Rashid. Famed for her intelligence and learning, she held discussions on policy and military strategy, received foreign ambassadors, and intervened on questions of justice. Much of her own enormous wealth she spent on public works and charity. Many likened her to a co-ruler, or even the real caliph. The success of al-Rashid's reign was underpinned by efficient government and administration. Much of it was modeled on that of their predecessors, the Sassanids, and they made extensive use of Persian and Central Asian bureaucrats. Of particular note was the Barmakid family. The Barmakids were descended from high priests of the Buddhist temple of Nawbahar near Balkh in modern Afghanistan. As early Abbasid allies, they played an important role in government, helping to foster an age of Islamic statecraft, imbued with elements of Sasanian Persian culture. They served the Abbasids well for 3 generations. But the power games of court could be dangerous and unpredictable. In 803, al-Rashid decided the Barmakids had got a little too big for their boots. The family experienced a sudden and dramatic fall from favor, with many of its members imprisoned or executed. Their demise ended Barmakid control of the post of vizier, a position that had recently emerged at court as the caliph's senior advisor and chief minister. It was a role of enormous significance. Some viziers would later wield so much power they overshadowed the caliph himself. The fame of al-Rashid's court spread far and wide. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, Holy Roman Emperor and the most powerful ruler in Europe, sent several embassies to Baghdad. In return, al-Rashid sent him dazzling gifts, including perfume, ivory chessboards, a marvelous water clock, and even an elephant named Abul Abbas, which lived for several years at Charlemagne's court in Aachen. Cultural life in the Caliphate, and Baghdad in particular, was remarkably cosmopolitan. The Abbasid court even celebrated Persian holidays such as Nowruz, Persian New Year. Such open-mindedness helped the Caliphate to flourish as a center of culture, science, arts, and medicine. The center of learning was the city's famous library, Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, though little of its function is known today. Here and across the Caliphate, scholars translated classical works from Greek, Middle Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic. Their efforts ensured the survival of countless works that would otherwise have been lost, including those by great figures such as Aristotle and Galen. They also made many of their own original discoveries, knowledge that would come to be much sought after by the medieval West. Baghdad's scholars led the world in many fields. Al-Kindi, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, was a famed polymath who wrote on logic, psychology, astronomy, astrology, and many other topics. Al-Khwarizmi's contribution to mathematics led to him being dubbed the father of algebra. The Latinized version of his name, Algorismus, is the origin of our word algorithm. The Christian scholar Hunayn ibn Ishaq was nicknamed the Sheikh of Translators for his role translating ancient texts into Arabic. Material culture also flourished under the Abbasids, with the introduction of glazed pottery in the 9th century, allowing new artistic possibilities. Many colorful pieces, decorated with animals and Kufic lettering, have been discovered across the former caliphate from this period. The Abbasid Caliphate also benefited from its position astride the Silk Roads, the name for the ancient network of trade routes linking Europe and Asia. Valuable imports traveled along this route, such as silk, spices, ivory, gemstones, and even thoroughbred horses. To encourage this trade, the Abbasids built new roads, as well as inns, hospices, and wells for the comfort of travelers. New ideas and technology also flowed along the Silk Roads. Chinese paper-making techniques first reached the Muslim world under the Umayyads, but it was under the Abbasids that paper production really took off. Much cheaper than parchment or papyri, abundant supplies of paper transformed the practice of administration and bookmaking and helped medieval Islam to become one of the most bookish cultures in world history. War in the 7th century, the first Arab conquests had pushed the frontier of the Eastern Roman Empire back to the Taurus Mountains. Since then, the Caliphate and Empire had been in a state of almost perpetual war, with frequent raids by both sides across the Syrian frontier. Twice, the Arabs had even besieged Constantinople itself, but failed to take the great city. In 782, al-Rashid himself had led an Abbasid force as far as the shores of the Bosphorus. By 804, the Eastern Roman Empire was paying annual tribute to the Caliphate. When Emperor Nicephorus stopped the payments, an Abbasid army crossed the Taurus Mountains and took his army by surprise at Krassos. The Romans suffered a heavy defeat. The emperor himself was lucky to escape with his life. The cycle of raid and counter-raid continued for years, with al-Rashid even moving the Abbasid capital to Raqqa to be closer to the frontier. But this fixation on his rival to the west may have blinded the caliph to trouble in the east. In 809, news arrived of revolt in Khorasan. It was while traveling east to face down this rebellion that Caliph Harun al-Rashid became sick and died. His 22-year reign would come to be seen as a golden age for the Abbasid Caliphate, a time of prosperity, stability, intellectual and cultural achievement. But al-Rashid's own efforts to ensure a peaceful succession were about to backfire disastrously and plunge the Caliphate back into civil war. The Abbasid Caliphate had flourished under the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, and to ensure its continued success, he arranged his succession in a way that he believed would ensure stability and peace. His son Muhammad was to be his heir, but in a move common since the time of the Umayyads, he also named another son, Abdullah, as Muhammad's heir. It proved a recipe for disaster. In 809, in Baghdad, Muhammad succeeded his father as caliph, taking the title Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. His half-brother Abdullah became governor of Khorasan, with the title Al-Mamun, the Trusted One. Rival factions soon formed at both courts. In Baghdad, Al-Amin's advisors urged him to remove his brother from the succession, and just a year into his reign, he tore up his father's arrangement. Al-Mamun was furious. Fraternal distrust exploded into civil war. Al-Mamun's Khorasani forces won a great victory against a much larger force at Ray and marched on to besiege Baghdad in 812. After a bloody, year-long siege, the city fell. Caliph Al-Amin was captured as he tried to flee and executed. Initially, Al-Mamun ruled the caliphate from his old base at Merv. Here, in an effort to widen his support after the civil war, he fostered a new alliance with the Alids. This powerful family was descended from Ali, fourth caliph and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. They'd later become leaders of Shia Islam, the branch of Islam that believes true spiritual authority belongs to Ali's descendants. Instead of traditional Abbasid black, Al-Mamun's court began to wear green, a color associated with the Alids. Al-Mamun even married two of his daughters into the Alid family and made Ali Imam Ali al-Rida his heir apparent. But these policies sparked hostility back in Iraq and led to major revolts in Baghdad. After 6 years, the caliph moved the capital back there to restore order and abandoned his Alid alliance. Al-Mamun is also remembered for his attempts to impose a new religious doctrine on the caliphate. He first invited distinguished scholars to Baghdad to discuss theological issues, such as the deeds of the companions of the Prophet, the Hadiths, and the nature of the Quran. However, his pronouncement that the Quran was at some point created by God, rather than co-eternal with God, encountered bitter resistance. 18 years of religious persecution followed, a period known as the Mihna or Inquisition, which saw dissenting scholars imprisoned or even executed. In 833, Al-Mamun was succeeded by his brother, who took the title Al-Mutasim. He'd proved far less interested in theological debate than the clash of armies. The armies of the Abbasid Caliphate, renowned in battle, were drawn from both Arab and non-Arab subjects. The Khorasanis, soldiers of the frontier province of Khorasan, were the troops who'd helped propel the Abbasids to power during the Third Fitna, or Islamic Civil War. Drawing on Persian and steppe warrior traditions, their ranks included both armored infantry and heavy armored cavalry, similar to European knights. The descendants of Khorasanis who settled near Baghdad were known as Abna al-Khorasan, sons of the people of Khorasan. Famed as elite and versatile infantrymen, they formed the loyal core of the caliph's army. Other notable contingents included the Daylamis, expert skirmishers from the highlands of northern Persia, while African troops, including military slaves and Muslim converts from Ethiopia, fought as heavy infantry armed with shield, sword, and spear. The great Caliph Harun al-Rashid was known to have an elite bodyguard of 40 African soldiers. Abbasid armies were particularly skilled in siege warfare and made expert use of catapults, mangonels, and battering rams. They even had specialist troops armed with naphtha or petroleum-based fire weapons. No contemporary illustrations are known, but they are thought to have been similar to this slightly later Byzantine illustration. The 9th century, however, would see changes so radical that some historians have termed it a military revolution. During the civil war between al-Rashid's sons, al-Mutasim had begun to expand his military retinue by purchasing Turkish slave soldiers. His favorite supplier was the Samanid family, governors of Transoxiana. These slave soldiers were seized from their villages as boys, or bought in slave markets, then sent for intensive military training alongside an Islamic education. They emerged as formidable cavalrymen and superbly skilled mounted archers. Al-Jahiz, a contemporary, wrote of them with awe, "The Turks are as good as others with the lance, and in addition, if 1,000 of their horsemen are hard-pressed, they will loose all their arrows in a single volley and bring down 1,000 enemy horsemen. No body of men can stand up to such a test." Historians dispute the exact timeline, but at some point in the 9th century, these Turkish slave soldiers, known as Mamluks, had come to form an elite corps within the Abbasid army, one that was personally loyal to the caliph and could be used to intimidate his political rivals. Turkish officers, despite their initial outsider status and ignorance of Arabic language and customs, began to wield huge influence at the caliph's court. This offended the old nobility, many of whom also stopped receiving traditional diwan payments for their military service. The discontent even pushed some soldiers to riot in the streets of Baghdad. To ease tension, Al-Mutasim constructed a new city for the Turkish military elite, Samarra. This was where he garrisoned the Turks and rewarded their commanders with land. And it's where, in 848, work began on the world's largest mosque and its famous spiral minaret. Al-Mutasim's reliance on slave soldiers to shore up his power had destroyed centuries of military tradition, and it had sown the seeds of future turmoil. 2 years later, the Caliph led his formidable new army against the old foe, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. The campaign ended in a great victory, the capture and sack of Amorium. O day of the Battle of Amorium, our hopes have returned from you, overflowing with honey-sweet milk, wrote Arab poet Abu Tamam. But even such victories failed to ease the tension between Turkish officers and Abbasid nobles. Some nobles even plotted to overthrow Al-Mutasim and expel the Turks, but their conspiracy was discovered and they were executed. Anarchy Al-Mutasim was succeeded by his eldest son, Al-Wathiq. Following his unexpected death, a second son, Al-Mutawakkil, took the throne, backed by the Turk generals. They'd hoped for a pliable puppet, but instead, Al-Mutawakkil decided it was time to reassert caliphal authority. On his orders, several Turkish leaders were assassinated, and he tried to use Arab and Armenian troops to counterbalance their influence. But the Turks struck back. In 861, the caliph was assassinated by his own bodyguards. The chaos and civil war that followed is known as the Decade of Anarchy. 4 caliphs took power, all puppets of the Turkish military elite. Each in turn was violently overthrown. Order was only restored with the accession of Caliph al-Mu'tamid in 870, but the anarchy had irreparably damaged the caliph's authority. Even before the Abbasids came to power, the vast caliphate had struggled to maintain control of its many regions. Abbasid authority west of Egypt had long been largely theoretical, but now multiple major uprisings broke out as local governors and warlords staked out their own claims to rule. Egypt, fertile and prosperous, was an early casualty, lost to a rebel Turkish commander who founded his own Tulunid dynasty. In southern Iraq, a major revolt broke out among agricultural slaves from eastern Africa, known as Zanj. The 14-year uprising devastated the region and severely disrupted Abbasid tax income and Baghdad's food supply. In Afghanistan, a coppersmith named Yaqub al-Safar made an astonishing rise to power, founding his own Safarid dynasty and conquering much of eastern Persia. His advance was only halted at the Battle of Deir al-Akwal in 876. In such turbulent times, Abbasid caliphs struggled to impose their authority. But there were some successes. Caliph al-Mu'tadid engineered a brief Abbasid resurgence thanks to military campaigning and shrewd diplomacy, notably his marriage to the daughter of the Tulunid ruler of Egypt. She was the celebrated Qatr al-Nada. Her name means dewdrop. One scholar described her as one of the most intelligent and regal women who ever lived. When al-Mu'tadid told his bride, "You've done well for yourself by marrying the caliph. What more could you thank God for?" She replied, "You've done well for yourself. This makes my father your subject. What more could you thank God for?" Her bold response was a sign of her character, as well as the delicate new balance of power between Abbasid caliphs and some of their more powerful subjects. During the reign of al-Mu'tadid's son, al-Muqtafi, Tulunid Egypt was fully reabsorbed into the Abbasid Caliphate. But elsewhere, the news was dire. Abbasid authority collapsed in Arabia, where one Shiite group, the Karmatians, even began attacking pilgrims on their way to Holy Mecca. In 930, they stole the Black Stone, the Holy of Holies, from the Kaaba, a terrible blow to Abbasid prestige. In Central Asia, the Persian Samanids carved out their own empire and declared independence. This was the height of the so-called Persian intermezzo, when native Persian dynasties ruled in Persia once more. Increasingly, the Abbasid caliph was said to reign but not rule. He'd become a symbol without power, often under the thumb of his vizier. By the 930s, the caliph had lost control of both the civilian administration and army command, which was handed over to a new official, the Emir al-Umara, commander of the commanders. The final humiliation came in 945. The Buyids were Shiite warlords from the Dalam mountains of northwestern Persia, but their first success was in Fars, before they went on to seize control of Persia and Iraq. Their triumphal entry into Baghdad was a deep humiliation for the Sunni Abbasids. Yet they retained the title of caliph as no more than figureheads under Buyid command and spectators to these turbulent times. 2 decades later, another Shiite dynasty, the Fatimids, swept along the North African coast, conquered Egypt, and founded Cairo as the capital of their own caliphate. Some historians label this the Shiite century, with Shiite dynasties ruling twin caliphates and dominating much of the Muslim world. But it was not to last. A dangerous new Sunni power was poised to burst out of Central Asia, the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks were pastoralists, nomadic livestock farmers from the Central Asian steppe. They were fierce warriors who became champions of Sunni Islam. At the end of the 10th century, possibly in response to climate change, they swept south into Khorasan. The Ghaznavid Empire, successor to the Samanids, was first to fall. The Seljuk Turks were unstoppable, surging westwards across the Persian plateau, taking Baghdad and toppling the Buyids, crushing a Byzantine army at Manzikert and forging the Great Seljuk Empire. Their triumph was tempered by the arrival of European crusaders who took Jerusalem in 1099 and carved out a series of crusader states. One Shia sect, shrouded in legend, struck back at the Seljuks with deadly precision. In 1092, Nizam al-Mulk, vizier of the Seljuk Empire, was killed by the Order of Assassins, its hit squad disguised as Sufi mystics. The Assassins, or Hashashin as they're known in Arabic, were a new Ismaili military order, formed in the mountains of northwestern Persia. Facing powerful enemies, but without an army of their own, they turned to subterfuge and assassination to achieve their goals. Many fanciful stories are told about the Assassins, but the order was real and feared, and responsible for scores of political murders over the next 2 centuries. Under the Seljuks, Abbasid caliphs continued to reign as spiritual leaders and figureheads. But the 12th century saw the fracturing of the Great Seljuk Empire, a familiar story of disputed successions and local governors making their bid for power. Sensing weakness, in 1136, Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtafi raised his own army to reassert Abbasid independence for the first time in nearly 2 centuries. Did you know that the Abbasid Caliphate, which reigned from 750 to 1258, was a golden age for Islamic culture, science, and philosophy? Let's explore why this era is often considered one of the most beautiful periods in Islamic history. The Abbasids came to power after the Umayyad dynasty, and they shifted the capital from Damascus to Baghdad. This move transformed Baghdad into a thriving metropolis and a center of knowledge and trade. Under the Abbasids, cities became melting pots of different cultures, fostering innovation and creativity. One of the hallmark achievements of this period was the establishment of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Scholars from various backgrounds gathered to translate and preserve ancient texts, making groundbreaking advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. For instance, Al-Khwarizmi, often referred to as the father of algebra, developed mathematical concepts that are still in use today. Art and architecture flourished as well. The Abbasid period saw the construction of stunning mosques and palaces, featuring intricate designs and magnificent calligraphy. This art not only beautified the cities, but also became a medium for expressing Islamic faith and identity. However, this golden age wasn't without its challenges. The empire faced internal divisions and external pressures, particularly from Crusaders and Mongols. These conflicts sometimes led to instability, which overshadowed the cultural achievements. Yet the legacy of the Abbasids continues to resonate today. Their contributions laid the groundwork for the Renaissance in Europe and influenced countless fields, from science to philosophy. In conclusion, the era of the Abbasids represents a unique blend of cultural diversity, intellectual flourishing, and artistic expression. While there were certainly challenges, their impact on the world is undeniable. Understanding this beautiful chapter in Islamic history not only enriches our knowledge, but also sheds light on the profound influences that shape our contemporary world. Thank you for joining me in exploring this remarkable period of Islamic history.